number on the screen is 312, and it is read. Before we go any further, if you want a new AI story every single night to fall asleep to, subscribe. One tap and a new story is waiting for you every evening. Nadia stands in the small foyer of her apartment building. The card reader by the inner door blinks. It has blinked like this for almost 2 minutes now. The little plastic square she has tapped against this same reader every morning for 3 years sits in her hand. The reader does not buzz. The lock does not click. The number on the screen does not move. 312. Read. Behind her, the outer door has already closed. She hears it settle into its frame with the soft thump of a refrigerator sealing shut. The foyer is warm. The radiator under the mailboxes hisses the way it always hisses in February. Someone weeks ago left a flyer for a piano teacher on the little wooden table by the elevator. The flyer is still there. The corners have curled. She taps the card again. The reader hums. The screen blinks. 312. Read. Her bag is heavy on her shoulder. Inside it is a paper sack of clementines, a carton of oat milk, a small white box of pastries she bought because Tuesdays are hard at the clinic, and she wanted something soft to eat at her kitchen table. The bag of clementines is warm against her hip. She can smell them faintly through the paper. She takes a breath. She tries the card a third time. She holds it there longer, the way you hold a thermometer under your tongue. The reader gives a polite double beep. Not the welcome beep, a different one. A beep that means number 312. Read. There is a small camera above the door. There has always been a small camera above the door. She has never looked at it before. Tonight, she looks at it. The little black dome looks back at nothing in particular. She puts the card away. She takes out her phone. The screen lights up and shows her, in the top right corner, a tiny circle she has stopped noticing over the years. The circle used to be green. Then, for a long time, it was yellow. Tonight it is red, and inside the red circle is the same number, 312. She opens the building app. The app loads. The app does not load. The app shows her a spinning gray wheel, and then a message in small gray letters that says, "Some features are currently unavailable for your account." There is a link that says, "Learn more," She taps it. A new page opens. The new page is blank. The elevator, somewhere above her, begins to descend. She can hear the cable working in the wall. She turns toward the inner door again, the one she cannot pass through, and watches the elevator number tick down through the little brass dial above it. 4, 3, 2. The doors open. A man she does not know steps out, holding a folded umbrella and a bag of takeout. He glances at her. He taps his card. The reader buzzes for him, warm and friendly. The lock clicks. He pulls the door open. He looks at her again, with the slight, polite confusion of someone who is not sure whether to hold a door for a stranger. She does not move. She does not know if she is allowed to move. The man hesitates. Then, gently, he lets the door swing closed behind him. She hears his footsteps cross the inner lobby. She hears the elevator doors close. She hears the cable working again, going up this time, carrying him home. The radiator hisses. The clementines are still warm against her hip. She tries the card one more time. 312. Red. She sits down on the little wooden table by the mailboxes, beside the curled piano teacher flyer. She sets the grocery bag carefully on the floor between her feet. She does not cry. She does not call anyone yet. She only sits there, in the small, warm foyer of the building she has lived in for 3 years, looking at a number on a screen that will not let her go upstairs. Outside, on the street, a delivery scooter goes by. Its little electric motor whines and fades. A bus sighs at the corner. The world on the other side of the glass is going about its evening, ordinary and indifferent, while inside the foyer, a woman sits with a bag of clementines and waits to understand what has happened to her. 312. Red. The screen does not change. Rewind. Before the locked door, before the red score, before the morning that broke her whole life into a before and an after, there was a Tuesday. An ordinary Tuesday in early spring. 6:14 in the morning. The sky over the city of Riverbend was the color of wet paper, and Nadia was already awake. She was 34 years old. She lived in a one-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a brick building near the river. The radiator hissed in the corner like it had something to say. Her cat, A gray tabby named Biscuit slept on the pillow beside her, paws tucked under his chest. Nadia worked as a dental hygienist at a clinic called Bright Smiles Family Dental. She had worked there for 9 years. She liked her patients. She liked the smell of mint and the soft scrape of the tools and the way old Mr. Petrov always brought her a small bag of dried apricots from his daughter's tree. She got up. She started the kettle. She fed Biscuit. The morning light came in through the kitchen window in pale stripes. While the water boiled, she opened her phone and tapped the green icon labeled Civic Link. Everyone in Riverbend had Civic Link. The mayor had announced it 2 years ago at a ribbon cutting downtown, smiling under a banner that said a smarter city for smarter citizens. The app was free. It came pre-installed on new phones sold in the city. It did 100 small things. It paid your parking. It logged your bus rides. It refilled your transit card. It let you book a slot at the public pool, vote in neighborhood polls, report a pothole, schedule a recycling pickup. It showed your tax balance. It showed your library fines. It showed a small green number in the top right corner of the screen. The number was called your trust index. Nadia's trust index that Tuesday was 847. She knew this without looking, the way some people know their weight. A good score. Above 800 got you the small perks the city advertised on its bus benches. Free transit on Sundays. A skip-the-line pass at the DMV. A discount on the electric bill in winter. Nadia had earned hers slowly, the way you earn anything slow and steady. She paid her rent on time. She voted. She volunteered at the river cleanup last April. She returned her library books. She didn't think about the number much. It was just there, like the time or the weather. She sipped her tea and scrolled through the app. The dashboard showed her week. A dental conference she'd registered for on Saturday. A bill due Friday. A note from her landlord about the buzzer being fixed. A small green check mark beside her name that meant verified resident, good standing. Her employer used CivicLink too. The clinic's scheduling system ran through it. When she clocked in each morning, she tapped her phone against a small reader by the front desk, and the system noted the time, the date, the location. The clinic got a tax break for using verified employees. Almost every employer in Riverbend used verified employees now. It was just easier. She got dressed in her pale blue scrubs. She braided her hair. She checked the mirror, kissed Biscuit on the top of his small flat head, and headed out into the gray morning. The bus came at 6:40. She tapped her phone against the reader. The light went green. The driver, a heavy man named Gus, who she saw every weekday, gave her the same small nod he always gave her. She sat by the window. She watched the city wake up. A billboard above the corner of 10th and Mill said Honesty, Pays. There was a smiling family on it. A father, a mother, 2 children, a golden retriever. The father held up his phone, and on the phone, in big friendly letters, was a number, 912. Nadia didn't really look at the billboard. She had seen it for months. It was just part of the city now, like the murals on the underpass, or the smell of bread from the bakery on 8th. She got to the clinic at 7:02. She tapped in. The light went green. Dr. Mensah waved from the back office. The first patient of the day, a nervous teenager named Ellie, was already in the waiting room with her mother. It was a normal Tuesday. The number in the corner of Nadia's phone was 847. She had no reason, none at all, to think about it. Nadia grew up in a city where reputation was something you built slowly, in person, over years. Her father ran a small electronics repair shop on a side street near the old market. He fixed radios, then televisions, then microwaves, then laptops. When a customer came in for the first time, he did not ask for a score. He looked them in the eye, shook their hand, and wrote their name in a green ledger he kept under the counter. If you needed credit, he gave it. If you forgot to pay, he called. If you still didn't pay, he stopped fixing your things. That was the whole system. It lived in a notebook with bent corners and coffee rings. The city worked that way for a long time. The bank on the corner had a manager named Mr. Idris who knew everyone's parents. To get a loan, you sat across from him in a wooden chair and answered questions about your job, your family, your plans. He filled out a form called the KR3, which asked for your employer, your monthly income, 2 personal references. He stamped it with a heavy brass stamp. If he said yes, you got the money. If he said no, you could ask why. He would tell you plainly, and sometimes he would tell you what to fix and come back in 6 months. It was not a fair system. Nadia knew that even as a child, Mr. Idris had favorites. He gave loans to his cousin's friends more easily than to strangers. Women who came in alone were sometimes told to bring their husbands. People from certain neighborhoods waited longer, were questioned harder, were turned away more often. The unfairness had a face, and the face had a name, and the name had an office with a door you could knock on. You could argue with Mr. Idris. People did. Nadia's aunt once stood in the lobby for 2 hours until he agreed to reconsider a denied application. She brought her tax records, her landlord's letter, a note from her employer at the textile factory. He read them all, sighed, and stamped the form again. This time, yes. The hospitals worked the same way. To see a specialist, you got a referral from your family doctor, who wrote it on a pink slip called a Form 9. The specialist's secretary called you back, sometimes the next day, sometimes the next week. If you were poor, you waited longer. If you were connected, you waited less. If you were dying, a nurse usually noticed and moved your name up the list. The nurse's name was on a badge. You could thank her or complain about her or send her flowers at the holidays. Landlords checked references by picking up the phone. Employers checked references by picking up the phone. When Nadia applied for her first job at the city water department, the hiring manager called her former boss at the bakery and asked, "Is she on time? Is she honest? Would you hire her again?" The boss said yes to all 3. That was the background check. It took 11 minutes. There were rules, of course. There were credit bureaus. There were court records and traffic citations and tax filings, all kept in beige folders, in beige cabinets, in beige rooms. If you wanted to see your own file, you could request it. It took 6 weeks. The file came in a manila envelope with your name typed on a label. You could read every page. If something was wrong, you filled out a dispute form and waited 4 to 8 weeks for a human being to review it. The human being's name and employee number appeared at the bottom of the response letter. The system was slow. It was inconsistent. It made mistakes. A misspelled name could follow you for years. A clerical error could deny you an apartment. A grudge from a landlord could quietly poison your next 3 applications. People knew this. People complained about this. There were newspaper columns about it, talk radio shows about it, lawyers who specialized in it. But the mistakes had edges. They had paper trails. They had signatures. When something went wrong, you could trace it backward slowly, through real offices with real chairs and real coffee makers, until you found the moment the error was made and the person who made it. That person might apologize, or refuse to apologize, or shrug. Either way, they existed. That was the city Nadia grew up in. Slow, flawed, deeply human. A city where a reputation was just a reputation, written in green ledgers and pink slips, kept by people you could find. The announcement came on a Thursday morning in early spring. Nadia heard it on the radio while she was driving to the clinic. The voice on the news sounded pleased, the way voices sound when they are reading something a public relations team has polished for weeks. The Ministry of Digital Services, in partnership with 3 major banks and a private analytics firm called Veristal, was launching something called the National Trust Index. A pilot, the announcer said. Voluntary at first. A modern tool for a modern country. Nadia turned the volume up at the red light. The press secretary spoke in the calm, even tone of a person reading good news. The trust index would reward responsible citizens. It would streamline access to public services. It would reduce fraud. It would make everyday life simpler for the people who already did the right thing. She remembered thinking that none of it sounded alarming. It sounded, if anything, a little dull. Like one more government portal she would have to log into once and then forget. The full rollout was scheduled in 3 phases. First, a soft launch in the capital and 4 regional cities. Then integration with the banking sector by autumn. Then, by the following spring, a national tier system tied to a single mobile app. The app was already in the stores. It had a soft blue logo shaped like a leaf. The Minister of Digital Services held a press conference that afternoon. Nadia watched a clip of it on her break. He stood at a podium with a clean blue backdrop behind him, the Veristal logo small and tasteful in the corner. He spoke about efficiency. He spoke about trust as the foundation of any healthy society. He used the phrase data-driven citizenship twice. A young woman from a financial newspaper asked how the score would be calculated. The minister smiled the way officials smile when they have been preparing for that exact question. The methodology, he said, was proprietary, but it drew on publicly available signals: tax compliance, court records, credit history, verified employment, civic participation. He said the word civic the way someone says the word wholesome. Veristal's chief executive spoke after him. She was younger than Nadia expected, with a careful gray blazer and the easy posture of someone who had given this exact speech to investors many times. The system, she said, used machine learning to identify patterns that humans alone could not see. It would catch fraud earlier. It would help banks lend more confidently. It would help hospitals allocate appointments more fairly. It would, above all, reward the quiet majority of citizens who had been doing everything right and getting nothing for it. That last line was the one the newspapers picked up. The quiet majority. People liked the sound of being seen. By the end of that first week, the app had been downloaded 2 million times. The morning shows ran segments on it. A popular host opened her own score on camera and laughed when it came back high. She said it felt like getting a gold star. Her co-host joked that he was afraid to check his. The banks moved quickly. Within a month, the largest of them announced that customers with a trust index score above a certain threshold would receive small benefits, lower fees on transfers, faster loan approvals, a waived charge here, a preferred rate there. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that felt like a punishment for the people who did not yet have a score. The pharmacy chain Nadia used sent her an email about a loyalty integration. If she linked her trust index to her pharmacy account, she would get small discounts on certain over-the-counter items. The email had a cheerful illustration of a hand holding a phone. The phone had the soft blue leaf on its screen. A few public commentators raised questions. A law professor wrote a column asking, what happened to people whose scores were low? A privacy advocate appeared on a late-night talk show and warned that proprietary algorithms had a way of hiding their mistakes. The host nodded politely and moved on to the next guest. Most people did not read the column. Most people did not watch the late-night segment. Most people downloaded the app, checked their score, and felt, for a brief moment, the small, warm satisfaction of being told they were doing fine. Nadia downloaded it on a Sunday evening, sitting on her couch with a cup of tea. The setup took less than 3 minutes. Her score came back at 782 out of a possible 900. The app showed a small green check mark beside the number. She put her phone down and went to bed. She did not think about the score again for almost 6 weeks. For a little while, the trust index was a small miracle. That is the strange part of this story. The part Nadia would think about later, sitting on her kitchen floor with the cordless phone in her lap. For the first 11 weeks, the system did exactly what the brochure promised. It worked. People liked it. People praised it. The first thing Nadia noticed was the bus pass. Her monthly transit card went down by €4. There was no announcement at the stop, no sign on the kiosk. The amount simply changed. A small green check appeared next to her name in the transit app, and below it, in soft gray letters, the words, Trust Tier 2, Reliable Commuter. She showed her sister over dinner. Her sister laughed and said it was about time someone gave her a discount for being boring. The pharmacy was next. Her allergy prescription, the one she had been buying every spring for 9 years, dropped by almost a third. The pharmacist, an older man with reading glasses on a beaded chain, slid the receipt across the counter and tapped the bottom line. Tier discount, he said. Be glad. My brother-in-law is at Tier 4. He pays full. She did feel glad. Quietly, privately, the way you feel when a stranger lets you cut in line. She did not ask what Tier 4 meant. Nobody did, yet. In the offices on the 18th floor of the Trust Authority building, the mood was something close to triumph. The director, a woman named Inji Vermak, stood at a quarterly town hall of a single slide. The slide had one number on it: 91.4%. That was the share of citizens, the slide said, who had improved their financial reliability score within the first 60 days. There was applause. A man in the back row whistled. Ng smiled and said into the microphone, "This is what good design looks like." The trade press picked it up within the week. A publication called Public Sector Futures ran a 6-page case study with photographs of the call center and a pull quote from the deputy minister. Faster service, lower default rates, a measurable lift in voluntary tax compliance. The article ended with a sentence. The consultancy who wrote it would later try to scrub from the archive. The trust index represents a quiet revolution in civic life, achieved without protest, without resistance, and without controversy. A senior product manager at the vendor, a software firm headquartered in a glass tower 2 cities away, got promoted that month. His LinkedIn post stayed up for years. Proud to share, it began, that our predictive citizen scoring platform has now been adopted by its 3rd national client. We are building infrastructure for a more trustworthy world. 2 competitors filed their own press releases within 10 days. One announced a pilot in a port city. The other announced an exclusive partnership with a regional bank. The phrase social scoring did not appear in any of these documents. The phrase used was behavioral risk modeling. Sometimes civic reliability. Sometimes simply the platform. A white paper appeared, sponsored by a think tank Nadia had never heard of, with a foreword by a former finance minister. It said the system reduced bureaucratic friction. It said it rewarded the responsible. It said, in a footnote on page 41, that edge cases would be reviewed by a human appeals officer within 30 business days. Nobody read the footnote. This is the part that matters. This is the fact that has to sit with you before the rest of the story begins. No one objected because there was, at that moment, nothing to object to. The buses were cheaper. The lines were shorter. The pharmacy was kinder. A young couple Nadia knew got approved for a mortgage in 4 days instead of 4 weeks, and they sent a photo of the keys to the family group chat. Her uncle, who had spent decades grumbling about government forms, said this was the first sensible thing the state had done in his lifetime. The system was not yet wrong. By every measure the country had agreed to track, by every dashboard glowing softly in every office on the 18th floor, the trust index was exactly what had been promised. Efficient, fair, quiet. There was no scandal to report. There was no victim to interview. There were only small green checks, small discounts, small conveniences distributed across millions of ordinary lives like sugar dissolving into warm water. Nadia paid €4 less for her bus pass. She bought her allergy pills. She walked home in the spring evening and did not think about the score again for almost a month. That month was the most dangerous month of her life. She just didn't know it yet. It was a Thursday afternoon in late October, and Nadia had 32 minutes between her last patient and her son's pickup window. The clinic sat on the second floor of a beige medical building on Maple Avenue. Below it, tucked between a tax preparer and a shoe repair, was a small coffee shop called Halftime. She went there almost every weekday. The owner, Marcus, knew her order: a medium oat milk latte, sometimes a lemon poppy muffin if it was a hard shift. She came down the stairs with her coat half on and her phone in her teeth. The bell above the door chimed. Marcus looked up from the espresso machine and gave her the small nod he always gave her. "Long one today?" he asked. "2 no-shows and a kid who swallowed a penny," she said. "So, yes." He laughed and started the latte without asking. She tapped her phone to the reader at the counter. The reader beeped, but not the friendly beep. A different one. 2 short tones, lower in pitch. The little screen turned pink. "Huh," Marcus said. He tilted the reader toward himself. "Try it again." She tapped again. The same 2 tones. The same pink screen. "That's weird," she said. "I just used it for gas this morning." "Card maybe." She pulled the plastic one from the back of her phone case and slid it through. The reader thought about it for a second. Then the pink screen returned, this time with small black letters underneath. Marcus turned it so she could read. "Payment not authorized. Merchant tier mismatch." Nadia stared at it. She had never seen those words before in her life. "What does that even mean?" she said. It wasn't really a question. Marcus shrugged. He was a calm man. He had the kind of face that did not get worried about small things. "I've been getting that one a few times this week," he said. "It's the new payment network. The trust thing. The trust index. Yeah, they tied it into the card processors last month. Sometimes it just doesn't like a transaction." He waved his hand. "Some kind of category thing. I don't know. It's a glitch." "A glitch," she repeated. "They sent us an email," he said. "They said if it happens, just have the customer pay cash or come back later. They're sorting it out." She dug through her bag. She had a 5 and 3 ones. The latte was $6.50. "I've got cash," she said. "Sort of," Marcus waved her off. "On me today. Get me next time." "Marcus, no. Nadia, go get your kid." She tried one more time to pay. The reader did the same thing. The pink screen. The 2 tones. She felt something small and warm move up the back of her neck, the way it did when a chart didn't match a patient. Not alarm, just notice. "Has it happened to anyone else?" she asked. He thought about it while he wiped the steam wand. "The guy who does deliveries for the flower place. The lady who teaches dance upstairs. A couple others. Mostly people I know. Mostly fine the next day. Mostly. They sort it out," he said again. "It's new. Everything new has bugs." She nodded, because that was true. She had worked with 3 different electronic chart systems in 8 years, and every one of them had spent its first 6 months doing things no one could explain. Once a system had charted a patient's weight as 4 pounds. Once it had marked a man allergic to oxygen. You learned to wait. You learned that the people who built these things were people, and people fixed things, eventually. "Okay," she said. She took the latte. It was warm through the paper. "Tell the network I said hi." "Will do," Marcus said. "Bring cash tomorrow, and we'll call it even." The bell chimed again as she stepped back out onto Maple. The afternoon was bright and cold and smelled like wet leaves. She walked the half block to her car, balancing the latte and her keys. And as she opened the door, she already wasn't thinking about it anymore. Her son had a science project due Friday. She needed to stop for poster board. The dog was overdue for the vet. She set the latte in the cup holder. She backed out of the spot. On the radio, someone was reading the weather. A glitch, an edge case, being looked into. She believed him. She had no reason not to. By the time she reached the elementary school parking lot, the pink screen and the two soft tones had already slipped out of the front of her mind. The way small wrong things do when the day is full of larger right ones. The coffee shop card was just the first one. Nadia might have forgotten about it if it had stayed alone. But it didn't stay alone. 3 days later, she went to renew her gym membership. The man at the counter typed her ID into the system, frowned, and typed it again. He apologized in that careful way people apologize when they don't know what they're apologizing for. Her membership tier had shifted. She could still come in, but the off-peak hours were closed to her now. He couldn't say why. The screen just said so. She opened the Notes app on her phone in the parking lot. She typed 2 lines: coffee shop, gym. She didn't know yet that the list would grow. The next week, her cousin Farah called. Farah was a dental hygienist in the next city over. She was crying a little, in the way people cry when they're more confused than sad. Her apartment application had come back flagged. The landlord said it wasn't a credit thing. It was a trust index thing. He'd been told to wait 60 days and resubmit. Farah had never missed a rent payment in her life. Nadia added a 3rd line: Farah, housing. At work, she started noticing it in the clients too. She was a case manager at a community health clinic. She'd been there 9 years. She knew the regulars by name, by the medications they took, by the names of their grandchildren. And she started to see a shape in the appointments that fell through. Mr. Ortega, who had come in every other Wednesday for 2 years, suddenly couldn't get his prescription refilled at the pharmacy across the street. His trust score had dropped after a dispute with his electric company. He didn't understand what one had to do with the other. Neither did Nadia. Mrs. Pham, 81 years old, was told she had to pay cash for her bus pass now. The clerk wouldn't explain. A young man named Devin, 23, came in for a routine checkup and mentioned, almost in passing, that he'd been turned down for a part-time job at a warehouse. the hiring portal had flagged him. He didn't know why. He had no record. He had finished trade school. He was polite and quiet and showed up early. Nadia started keeping screenshots. She wasn't sure why at first. She just felt that if she didn't, she would start to doubt herself. A folder on her desktop, named simply Notes. Inside, pictures of error messages clients had shown her on their phones. Receipts that said Tier 2 pricing in small print. A printout from Farah's landlord with the words Trust Index, Hold circled in pen. She wasn't a programmer. She didn't know what an algorithm was. Not really. She knew it was a word people said on the news. She knew it meant a computer was deciding something. That was the limit of what she knew. But she had been doing this job for 9 years, and she knew what a pattern looked like when it walked through her door, wearing different faces. She brought it up to her supervisor on a Thursday afternoon. Her supervisor was a kind woman named Margaret, who had been at the clinic for almost 20 years and wore reading glasses on a beaded chain. Nadia sat down across from her with her phone open to the list. She tried to explain it the way she had practiced in her head on the drive over. She said she had been noticing that some of their clients were being locked out of things. Not big things, always. Small things. A pharmacy, a bus pass, a job application. She said it seemed to be connected to the trust index. She said she didn't think the system was working the way people thought it was. Margaret listened. She nodded at the right places. She let Nadia finish. Then she folded her hands on the desk and smiled the smile that meant the conversation was already over. Nadia, she said, I hear you. I really do. But these systems go through a lot of review before they roll out. There are people whose whole job is to make sure they're fair. If something were really wrong, we'd be hearing about it from the state, not from individual cases. She said the word individual gently, like a small correction. She said the clinic had to be careful not to get involved in policy matters. She said it wasn't their lane. She said Nadia should focus on the clients she could help directly, and that she was doing wonderful work, and that she should try not to carry things that weren't hers to carry. Nadia thanked her. She walked back to her desk. She added Margaret's name to the list. Nadia notices it on a Thursday. The kind of Thursday that feels like any other. Rain on the bus windows. A boy across from her playing a game on his phone. The smell of wet coats and morning coffee. She is on her way to the clinic where she works the front desk, and she is checking her trust index, apt the way other people check the weather. The number is 712. That is fine. That is normal. A week ago, it was 718. The week before that, 724. She frowns at the screen. The drop is small, almost nothing. But she has not done anything. She paid her rent. She returned her library books. She did not cross against the light, because she never does. She scrolls down to the section called Recent Activity, the part that usually tells her why her score moved. The section is empty. Just a soft gray line and the words "No flagged events." She taps the help icon. A panel slides up. She reads it twice. Your trust index reflects a holistic assessment of behavioral signals. Minor fluctuations are normal and do not require explanation. That sentence was not there last month. She is almost sure of it. Last month, every change came with a reason. A late phone bill, a missed dentist appointment, a traffic ticket from 2 years ago that had finally been processed into the system. The reasons were sometimes annoying, sometimes wrong, but they were there. You could see them. You could argue with them in theory. Now the reasons are gone. Or rather, the reasons are still there for the big drops. But the small ones, the quiet little subtractions of 4 points and 6 points and 3 points, those have become weather. They just happen. She gets off the bus. She walks to the clinic. She tells herself she is being paranoid. At lunch, she opens the app again. 710. Another 2 points since the bus. She types into the search bar. She types, "Why did my score change?" The app shows her an article titled "Understanding Your Index." She has read it before, but the version on her screen is different now. There is a new paragraph near the bottom. It is written in the same calm font as the rest. As of our most recent platform update, the index incorporates ambient signals from your network and environment. These signals are processed continuously and are not itemized in your activity log. Ambient signals, network, environment. She reads it 3 times. She does not know what any of those words mean exactly. She knows what they could mean. They could mean the people she stands next to on the bus. They could mean the websites her neighbors visit through the building's shared Wi-Fi. They could mean the cousin she texted last week, the one who lost his job and has been sleeping on a friend's couch. She thinks back to 2 weeks ago when a small drop had a reason next to it, a reason she could see, a reason she could fix. That was not a feature then. That was a bug being patched. The engineers, somewhere in a building she will never visit, had decided that showing people every reason was creating too many complaints. So they stopped showing them. They wrote it down in a release note. They posted the release note on a developer page that nobody outside their office reads. They updated the help text. They moved on. Nadia does not know any of this. She only knows that the explanations have softened into mist. She closes the app. She eats her sandwich. She watches the rain. That evening on the train home, she sees a man in a gray coat staring at his phone. His face is doing the same small frown she did this morning. He swipes. He taps. He swipes again. He looks up briefly, and their eyes meet, and they both look away quickly, the way strangers do. She wonders if his number went down too. She wonders if there is a quiet little subtraction happening in thousands of phones right now. On this train, on every train, and nobody is being told why. At home, she makes tea. She sits at the kitchen table. She opens her laptop and looks for news about the trust index. She finds nothing. No press release, no article, no notice from her bank or her landlord or her employer. The change was real. The change was documented. The change was somewhere signed off by a project manager and pushed to production at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday. Nobody had to tell her. The system simply began to behave differently. And she, like everyone else holding a phone tonight, was expected to adjust without noticing. She closes the laptop. The tea has gone cold. Step away from Nadia for a moment. Set down her morning, her card, her coffee shop. Walk with me through what was already known in public, in print, in court filings, long before she ever stood at that counter. The first warnings did not come from inside the trust index. They came from people who had watched systems like it before, in other cities, in other countries, under other names. The pattern was old. The branding was new. In 2014, the Chinese State Council published a planning outline for what it called a social credit system. Western reporters at Reuters, the BBC, and Wired covered it as a curiosity at first. Then the rollouts began. By 2018, the city of Rongcheng in Shandong province had assigned every adult resident a starting score of 1,000 points. Points went down for jaywalking, for late bills, for what officials called spreading rumors. Points went up for donating blood, for praising the government online, for being a civilized family. Foreign Policy magazine reported that by 2019, the system had blocked more than 23 million plane and train ticket purchases from people whose scores had fallen too low. That number is worth holding. 23 million trips, not arrests, not trials, just doors that quietly would not open. The systems that followed in other countries did not call themselves social credit. They called themselves fraud detection, or risk scoring, or trust verification. The mechanics were the same. The Dutch government ran a program called CRI, the System Risk Indication, which used algorithms to flag welfare recipients in low-income neighborhoods. In February 2020, a court in The Hague ruled it illegal. The judges wrote that the system violated the European Convention on Human Rights. By then, families had already been investigated, accused, and stripped of benefits. A separate Dutch scandal, the Toeslage affair, the child care benefits affair, surfaced around the same time. A tax authority algorithm had flagged roughly 26,000 families as likely fraudsters. Most were innocent. Many had dual nationality or foreign-sounding names. Parents lost their homes. Children were taken into state custody. In January 2021, the entire Dutch government resigned over it. The Prime Minister, Mark Rutte, called it a great injustice. The algorithm did not resign. The algorithm was simply switched off and replaced. In the United States, the pattern showed up in the COMPAS recidivism tool, the one ProPublica investigated in 2016. reporters Julia Angwin, Jeff Larson, Surya Madhu, and Lauren Kirchner found that Black defendants were nearly twice as likely as white defendants to be wrongly flagged as future criminals. The company that built it, Northpoint, disputed the findings. Judges kept using the scores anyway. In Michigan, between 2013 and 2015, an unemployment fraud detection system called MeDoes falsely accused more than 40,000 people of cheating the state. Wages were garnished. Tax refunds were seized. Some people filed for bankruptcy. A 2017 review found the system's error rate was around 93%. The state eventually paid a $20 million settlement. The pattern is not hidden. It is in court records, in audit reports, in newspapers of record. The Brookings Institution, the AI Now Institute at New York University, the Algorithmic Justice League, founded by Joy Buolamwini at MIT, the Ada Lovelace Institute in London. All of them published papers, year after year, describing the same shape. A scoring system goes live. It works most of the time. The errors fall disproportionately on people who cannot easily challenge them. The errors are not corrected because the system, on average, looks accurate. And average is what gets reported to the board. In 2018, Virginia Eubanks published a book called Automating Inequality. She studied 3 American systems: a Medicaid eligibility algorithm in Indiana, a homelessness intake tool in Los Angeles, and a child welfare risk model in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. She wrote that these systems do not invent new cruelties. They take the old ones and run them faster at scale with the appearance of math. By the time the Trust Index launched in Nadia's country, every one of these reports was already on the public record. The Dutch ruling, the Michigan settlement, the Chinese rollout numbers, the ProPublica investigation, the Eubanks book. Members of Parliament had been briefed. Civil society groups had submitted written comments during the consultation period. A coalition of 43 organizations had signed a joint letter asking for a delay. The letter received a pall. Nadia found the book in the back of a used shop, 3 blocks from her apartment It was a Wednesday afternoon, and she had taken the long way home because the short way past the coffee shop. The book was thin. The cover was orange. The title was Weapons of Math Destruction. The author's name was Cathy O'Neill. She did not know then that O'Neill had been a mathematician at Harvard. She did not know that O'Neill had worked at a hedge fund called D.E. Shaw during the 2008 crash, and that what she saw there had changed her life. Nadia only knew the book was $4, and the title felt like something she needed to read. She read it that night, sitting on the floor with her back against the couch. O'Neill had published the book in 2016. That was 9 years before the trust index went live in Nadia's city, 9 years before the coffee shop, the bank, the closed doors. O'Neill had described in plain language exactly what was happening to Nadia now. She had a name for it. She called them WMDs, Weapons of Math Destruction. A WMD, O'Neill wrote, had 3 traits. It was opaque, it was scaled, and it caused damage. The people inside it could not see how it worked. The system touched millions of lives, and when it got something wrong, the harm spread fast and was hard to undo. Nadia underlined that part with a pen she found under the couch. O'Neill had testified before Congress. She had spoken at conferences. She had sat across from journalists and said calmly that the math was being used to launder old prejudice into new authority. Algorithms are opinions embedded in code, she said. They are not objective. They are not neutral. They reflect the goals and the ideology of the people who build them. She said this in 2017. She said it again in 2018. She said it in interviews and in classrooms and in the back rooms of policy meetings. She said it on a TED stage in front of a slow-blinking red light, with her hair the color of a stoplight. The video had been watched more than 2 million times. Nadia found the video on her phone in bed at 1 a.m. O'Neill on the stage was small and certain. She talked about teachers fired by an algorithm in Washington, D.C. She talked about job applicants screened out by personality tests. She talked about credit scores that punished the poor for being poor. She said the systems were not just unfair, they were unaccountable. The era of blind faith in big data must end, she said. line was from 2017. Nadia paused the video and sat in the dark and listened to the radiator click. O'Neill had not been ignored exactly. Her book had sold well. She had been invited to advise governments. She had founded a company that audited algorithms for bias. She had been profiled in the New York Times. Her warnings had reached the people who needed to hear them. They had nodded. They had clapped. They had tweeted the quotes. And then they had built the systems anyway. That was the part Nadia could not get past. It wasn't that no one had warned them. It was that the warnings had become content. Something to share. Something to feel briefly serious about on a Tuesday between meetings. The men and women who designed the trust index had read O'Neill. Some of them had cited her in their white papers. Some of them had used her vocabulary, the very words, in the slide decks they showed to investors. They had used those words to describe what their system was not. In one promotional video for the Trust Index, a vice president had stood in a glass-walled office and said, "We are not building a weapon of math destruction. We have built in transparency. We have built in appeal. We have built in human review." He smiled at the camera. The video had 900,000 views. Nadia watched it twice. The transparency was a help page. The appeal was a form. The human review was a contractor in another city, paid by the case, with 60 seconds to decide. O'Neill had warned about this, too. She had said that companies would borrow the language of accountability without the substance. She had called it ethics theater. She had said it on a podcast in 2019, and the host had laughed because the phrase was good. Nadia closed her laptop. She put the orange book on the nightstand. She lay in the dark and thought about how many people had heard the warning and how few had listened, and how the difference between hearing and listening was the difference between her old life and her new one. Her name was Priya Menon. She was 34 years old. She worked on the 7th floor of a glass building downtown in a department called Model Risk Assessment. Her badge said she was a senior compliance auditor, grade III. Her job was small and specific. She read the documents that engineers wrote about the trust index, and she signed a form that said the math inside was acceptable. She had signed that form 11 times before, once a quarter for nearly 3 years. Each time, the engineers sent her a packet. Each time, she read it on her tablet, on the train ride home, with her shoes off and her feet on the seat across from her. Each time she signed. On the morning of October 8th, she did not sign. The packet that quarter was 412 pages. It described an update called Release 14.2. Most of it was routine. New data sources, new scoring weights, a new way to handle missing information. But on page 207, in a footnote, there was a line that made her stop reading. The line said that, starting with this release, a person's score could be lowered based on the scores of people they spoke to on the phone. Not what they said, just who they called, and how often, and for how long. Priya read the line 3 times. Then she put down her tablet and made a cup of tea and sat at her kitchen table and read it a 4th time. The wording was careful. It used the phrase network association signals. It did not use the word guilt. It did not use the word contagion. But that is what it described. She thought about her mother, who called her cousin in the village every Sunday. She thought about her cousin, who had once been late on a loan. She thought about the long, quiet chain of phone calls that connected ordinary people to each other. The way a city is connected by its wires. On Monday, she went to work and asked for a meeting with her supervisor. His name was Daniel Roth. He had been her supervisor for 4 years. He was a kind man who kept a small cactus on his desk and remembered her daughter's name. She told him she could not sign off on Release 14.2. She told him why. She used the phrase guilt by association. She used the phrase due process. She said the footnote on page 207 would, in her professional judgment, harm people who had done nothing wrong. Daniel listened. He did not interrupt. When she was finished, he said he understood her concerns and that he would pass them up the chain. He asked her to put it in writing. He asked her to keep it short. She wrote 1 paragraph, 6 sentences. She sent it on Tuesday morning at 9:47 a.m. to Daniel, with 3 people copied. She kept a printed copy in a folder in her desk drawer. Nothing happened for 9 days. On the 10th day, a woman from legal came to her desk. The woman was friendly. She said the company appreciated Priya's diligence. She said the footnote had been reviewed by the ethics committee and was considered, in their words, within acceptable risk parameters. She said the release would proceed on schedule. She asked Priya gently whether she would like to reconsider her signature. Priya said no. The woman from legal nodded. She said someone else would sign instead. She said this would not affect Priya's performance review. She said she hoped Priya understood. That afternoon, a different auditor signed the form. His name was on the document by 4:30 p.m. The release went live 3 weeks later. Priya kept the printed copy of her email in the folder in her desk drawer. She did not tell a reporter. She did not write an open letter. She did not stand up at a city council meeting. She went back to her work. She signed the next quarter's release because the next quarter's release did not contain the footnote that had stopped her. She told herself she had done what she could. She told herself the system was bigger than one auditor. She told herself that someone, somewhere, would catch the next problem. This is what dissent looked like in the years before the trust index spread. It looked like one woman at one desk on one Tuesday morning sending one paragraph to her supervisor. It did not look like a movement. It did not look like a headline. It looked like a folder in a drawer in a building that most people walked past without ever noticing. 2 years later, when reporters finally asked, Priya still had the folder. Nadia started with the trust office helpline on Wednesday morning. The recorded voice told her she was caller 43. She set the phone on the kitchen counter and made coffee. The hold music was a thin, looping piano piece, the kind you hear in dentist waiting rooms. She listened to it for an hour and 14 minutes. When a person finally picked up, the woman sounded tired but kind. Nadia explained the coffee shop, the pharmacy, the small refusals stacking up. The woman asked for her trust ID. She typed for a long time. Then she said the words Nadia would hear from 6 different people over the next 2 days. Your score is within normal range. I don't see any flags on our end. Nadia asked who could see the flags then. The woman paused. The merchants have their own scoring overlays. We don't have visibility into those. She called the Merchant Association next. They told her merchants licensed the trust index from a private vendor called Sesame Analytics. Sesame did not take consumer calls. There was a web form. She filled it out. The confirmation page said someone would respond within 30 business days. Thursday morning, she went to her manager, Devin. Devin ran the regional logistics floor and had known Nadia for 9 years. She told him about the score, about the doors closing in small ways. He listened with his hands folded. When she finished, he said he was sorry. He said he'd look into whether the company had a contact at the vendor. Then he said something that stayed with her. Nadia, I have to be careful here. If I push on this and it turns out there's something on your file we don't know about, it puts the company in a position. Let me think. He never came back to her about it. She tried HR that afternoon. The HR partner pulled up a policy document on her screen. We follow the trust index for background verification, but we don't generate the scores. We're a downstream user. She said the company's contract with Sesame included a clause that prevented them from disputing individual scores on an employee's behalf. The contract was confidential. She apologized twice. Friday, Nadia called the State Consumer Protection Office. She waded through hold music again, a different loop, strings this time. A young man took her information. He was polite. He told her that Sesame Analytics was registered in a different state, and that the trust index was classified as a private commercial product, not a credit bureau. We don't have jurisdiction over private reputation services, he said. You'd want the federal agency. He gave her a number. The federal number had an automated tree with 11 options. She pressed for scoring and rating disputes. A new menu opened. She pressed again. A recording told her the office was currently reviewing its rulemaking authority for algorithmic consumer products and was not accepting new complaints at this time. There was no option to leave a message. She emailed a reporter at the city paper who had written about the trust index last spring. The reporter wrote back that evening. She was sympathetic. She said she'd love to follow up, but her editor wasn't running individual impact stories on the index right now. paper had received a legal letter from Sesame after the spring peace. "We're being careful," the reporter wrote. "I'm sorry. Keep my email." Saturday, she found a lawyer who took a phone consultation for $60. He listened for 10 minutes and then sighed in a way Nadia could tell he had sighed many times before. "The challenge is, you haven't been formally denied anything. No bank has closed your account. No employer has fired you. The merchants who refused you can claim merchant discretion. There's no decision to appeal because there's no decision on paper." He told her she could sue Sesame, but the contract every user signed when they activated their Trust ID included a mandatory arbitration clause. You'd be in front of an arbitrator they pay for. I've seen the outcomes. She called her city councilwoman's office on Monday. A staffer took notes. He was thorough. He asked her to send everything in writing. He said the councilwoman was aware of constituent concerns about the index. He said there was a working group. That night, Nadia sat at her kitchen table with a yellow legal pad. She had written down 11 phone numbers, 4 email addresses, 2 case reference codes, and 1 form confirmation. Nothing on the page connected to anything else. Each office had been polite. Each office had been correct by its own rules. The system was functioning exactly as it was designed to function. That was the part she could not stop thinking about as she turned out the kitchen light. Step back from Nadia for a moment. Set down the hold music. Set down the form she could not submit. We are going to look at a different set of documents now. Not hers. The ones the Trust Index office wrote about itself. These records exist, not in this fictional city, but in the real programs this story is built from. They surfaced in court filings, in journalism, in regulator subpoenas. The pattern is always the same. The failure was named inside the building long before it was named outside. The first memo we have is dated 26 months before Nadia's card was declined at the coffee shop. It came from a junior data scientist on the modeling team. She had been asked to audit fairness across neighborhood groupings. Her document was 11 pages. The summary line read, "The current weighting produces a feedback loop in low-income postal codes. scores decline faster than behavior changes. Recovery is mathematically difficult. She filed it through the internal review system. The ticket was tagged P3 non-blocking. That tag mattered. P3 meant the issue could wait for a future release cycle. It would not stop the launch. It would not require a fix before the system went live. 3 weeks later, a senior engineer added a comment to the ticket. The comment is one sentence, flagging for revisit after Q2 metrics review. The revisit never happened. The ticket stayed open for 19 months and was closed eventually, with the note stale, superseded by new model version. We know about a second document. It is a slide deck, internal, marked confidential, shown at a leadership offsite. One slide is titled Known Limitations. It lists 4. The third bullet reads, compounding penalty effect in users with limited financial mobility may result in lockout scenarios. The slide also contains a smaller line at the bottom. Mitigation, customer service escalation path. That was the plan. The mitigation for people getting locked out of their lives was a phone line. We have, from a deposition, the testimony of a product manager who left the company 8 months before launch. She described a meeting in which she raised the lockout concern directly. Her words, taken from the transcript, are these: I asked what happens to someone who can't get their score back up. I was told the system would self-correct over time. I asked how long. Nobody had a number. She resigned the following month. Her exit interview, later released through Discovery, contains a single paragraph of concern about the trust index. The HR summary of that interview describes her departure as personal reasons. There is a Slack channel. It was called Model Quality Internal. Messages from it were entered into evidence in a class action filing. One exchange from 14 months before launch runs like this. Engineer A writes, the cascade behavior is still there in the latest run. Engineer B writes, yeah, we saw it. Legal says it's fine as long as we don't market it as predictive. Engineer A writes, we are marketing it as predictive. Engineer B writes a single character in reply. A period. A period. That is in the court record. The compliance team produced a risk register. trust index appeared on it. The risk was rated medium. The mitigation column read, ongoing monitoring. There is no evidence that the monitoring produced any document, any alert, any escalation in the 22 months between that entry and the first wave of public complaints. There was one outside voice. A consulting firm was hired to perform an independent review 6 months before launch. Their draft report, later leaked, contained a section called Population Level Effects. It recommended a delay. It recommended a pilot in a single district before national rollout. It recommended what it called an off-ramp, a way for people whose scores fell below a threshold to recover through a human review, not an algorithmic one. The final report, as delivered, did not contain that section. The consulting firm was paid in full. The partner who signed the final version later moved to a senior role inside the Trust Index office itself. None of this was hidden in some encrypted vault. It sat in ticketing systems, in shared drives, in Slack logs, in expense reports for the offsite where the deck was shown. It sat in the resignation letter of the product manager. It sat in the period typed by engineer. The failure was not unforeseen. It was foreseen, documented, ticketed, presented, and filed. The dates are clear. The names are on the documents. When the Trust Index went live, every person in the room who had read those memos already knew what would happen to someone like Nadia. They knew the shape of it. They knew the math of it. They had a phone line ready. The memo went out on a Thursday in March. It sat in inboxes over the weekend. By Monday, it had been read by 17 people. By Friday, it had been acknowledged by 9. 2 of those 9 forwarded it up. One of those 2 added a note that said, "Worth a closer look when bandwidth allows." That note is where the story of the silence really begins. The safety review was already on the calendar. It had been scheduled for the second quarter, which meant April, May, or June. In April, the team lead went on parental leave. In May, the conference room they had booked was given to the rollout team. Because the rollout team had a deadline and the audit team did not. In June, someone suggested it would make more sense to wait until until the third quarter data came in. That way, the review would have more to work with. Everyone nodded. The review moved to October. In July, the board met. The agenda, drafted 3 weeks earlier, included a line item called Trust Index, Disparate Impact Findings. The night before the meeting, an executive assistant received a quiet email. The line item was moved to any other business. When the meeting ran long, as meetings do, any other business was tabled for the next session. The next session was 8 weeks away. In August, the company announced a hiring freeze. It was framed as prudent. Costs were up. Investors were watching. The freeze landed by ordinary coincidence on 3 open positions: a senior data ethicist, a statistical auditor, a compliance officer with a background in algorithmic fairness. The job listings came down on a Tuesday. No one wrote a press release. No one had to. In September, there was a reorganization. The working group that had drafted the original memo was folded into a larger team called Platform Integrity. The new team had a broader mandate and a smaller headcount. The man who had written the memo found himself with 2 new managers, neither of whom had read it. When he raised it in his first one-on-one, his new manager said, "Send it over. I'll get to it this week." That manager left the company in November. These were not decisions made in a single room. There was no villain at a desk pressing a button. There was a calendar. There was a budget. There was a quarterly target. There was a senior vice president who genuinely cared about doing the right thing, and who also had 41 other things on her list that month. And the trust index issue, while serious, did not have a deadline attached to it. Things without deadlines drift. That is the physics of an institution. Nadia, of course, knew none of this. In those same months, she was living her life. In April, she paid her rent on time. In May, she took her mother to a doctor's appointment. In June, she got a small raise. Her trust index score, which she did not check often, ticked up by 3 points. She felt, in a vague way, that things were going well. In October, the safety review finally happened. It lasted 90 minutes. The team had been given a week to prepare. 2 of the 4 people in the room were new to the project. The slides showed the disparate impact data from the memo. Someone asked whether the findings had been replicated on the most recent data set. They had not. There had not been time. The meeting ended with an action item. Replicate the findings, then reconvene. The reconvening was scheduled for January. In November, the rollout team shipped a new feature. The feature was popular. The press release used the word trusted 11 times. No one from the safety review was quoted. No one from the safety review was asked. In December, the year-end report went to the board. It mentioned the trust index 16 times. It did not mention the memo. The phrase disparate impact did not appear. The phrase ongoing monitoring appeared 4 times. The board approved the report with a unanimous voice vote, and then they went to lunch. This is how the gap between knowing and acting gets filled. Not with malice, with calendars, with reorganizations, with parental leaves and hiring freezes and meetings that ran long, with the ordinary, forgivable human friction by which a company that already agreed something was wrong manages, month by month, not to fix it. By the time the press release came out the following spring, 20 months had passed since the original memo. The release announced a new commitment to fairness. It was warmly received. Nadia did not read it. She was at work, scanning her card at the door, watching the small green light come on. The first call came from a reporter named Devin HSU. He wrote for a small technology newsletter that maybe 10,000 people read. He had been tracking complaints about the trust index for 6 weeks. He had a folder of 42 stories. Nadia's was one of them, though she didn't know it yet. A friend had passed her note along, the one she'd written on the city forum, the one no one had answered. Devin called the trust office on a Wednesday afternoon. He asked simple questions. Why were certain neighborhoods seeing more score drops than others? Why the appeals line had an average wait of 4 hours? Why the model's training data had never been published? He gave the press office 48 hours to respond. The statement came back at 5:58 p.m. on Friday, 2 minutes before the weekend. It was 3 paragraphs long. Nadia read it on her phone while standing in line at the pharmacy. Her sister had texted her the link. The headline said, "Trust Office responds to concerns about index accuracy." The first paragraph began with the words, "We take these concerns seriously." It said the trust index had been built with input from civic leaders, ethics advisors, and independent auditors. It said the company was deeply committed to fairness, transparency, and the well-being of every resident enrolled in the program. The sentence about well-being had clearly been written by a lawyer and softened by a marketer. It said nothing and meant nothing and sounded warm. The second paragraph addressed what it called isolated incidents. It said that while the company could not comment on specific cases due to privacy protections, it was aware that a small number of users had reported irregularities in their scores. It said an internal review was underway. It said the review would be thorough. It did not say when the review had started. It did not say who was conducting it. It did not say what would happen if the review found something wrong. The third paragraph was the part Nadia read twice. It said the trust index had served over 4 million residents with a satisfaction rate above 91%. It said the program had reduced loan defaults by an estimated 18%. It said the company looked forward to continuing its partnership with the city. It thanked residents for their patience and their trust. Nadia held her phone and felt her face go still. There was nothing in the statement about the coffee shop, nothing about the dental clinic, nothing about the bus pass that wouldn't load, nothing about the 4-hour appeals line or the 11 different hold queues or the form that asked for documents she didn't have. The statement was written about a different program. A program where everything worked. A program where the only problem was a few confused users who needed reassurance. She thought, "I am one of the isolated incidents." The statement spread through the trade press the next morning. 3 publications carried it. One ran it almost verbatim under the headline, "Trust Office Responds, Stands by Model." Another paraphrased it and added a quote from a vendor analyst who called the trust index a leading example of civic AI. The third buried it on page 9 of a Monday newsletter and added one line of context. Critics have raised concerns about transparency. Though the company maintains the system is functioning as designed. The regulator's office filed the statement into its quarterly review document. It appeared as footnote 47 on page 203. The footnote read, "The vendor has affirmed that reported irregularities are limited in scope and currently under internal review. No further action required at this time." 2 weeks later, the company held its earnings call. The CFO mentioned the trust index in his prepared remarks. He said the program continued to perform above expectations. He said the company had addressed recent media inquiries with a clear and confident response. He said civic AI was a growth sector and the company was well positioned. An analyst asked one follow-up question. The CFO repeated the phrase, "isolated incidents." The analyst moved on. The stock ticked up 40 cents by close. The story had now been told in the institution's voice. It had been carried in 3 publications, filed by one regulator, repeated in one earnings call. It had become the official version, the version that would be cited later in lawsuits, in hearings, in the long afterward. Nadia read the statement one more time that Saturday night, sitting at her kitchen table. The pharmacy bag was on the counter. The coffee in her mug had gone cold an hour earlier. She recognized nothing in the words. Not herself, not her neighborhood, not the coffee shop or the dental clinic or the bus that wouldn't let her board. The program described in the statement was not the program she lived in. There was supposed to be a guardrail. On paper, there was one. It had a name. It had an office. It had a website with a blue header and a phone number that nobody ever called. The office was called the Public Algorithmic Integrity Board. Most people just called it the PAIB. It had been created 3 years before the trust index went live in a piece of legislation that ran 412 pages. The bill had passed on a Friday afternoon in late summer. Almost no one read it. The board was buried on page 286. The PAIB had a clear job. Any scoring system used by a city agency had to be filed with the board before it went live. The board would review the model. The board would open a public public comment period. The board would issue a finding. Only then could the system be deployed at scale. That was the design. Here is what actually happened. The trust index was filed with the PAIB on a Tuesday in March. The filing was 1,100 pages long. The technical appendix alone ran 600 pages. The board had a staff of 7 people. 2 of them were lawyers. 1 was an administrative assistant. The other 4 were analysts, and 3 of those 4 had been hired in the last 6 months. The public comment period was set at 30 days. That is the legal minimum. The vendor's lawyers had asked for the minimum, and the board had granted it without discussion. 30 days for a 600-page technical appendix, written in a dialect of math that most people in the city could not read. 41 comments came in. Most were from the same 3 civil liberties groups. One was from a retired statistics professor at the state university. He wrote 9 pages. He pointed to a section on page 492 and said the feature weighting would compound small errors over time. He used the phrase feedback loop. He used the phrase irreversible. He asked the board to extend the comment window. The board did not extend the window. The board also did not write the technical review itself. It contracted that work out. This is normal. Most regulatory bodies in the country do this. They do not have the in-house expertise, so they hire it. The contract for reviewing the trust index went to a consulting firm called Brennan Hale. Brennan Hale had a strong reputation. Their data ethics practice had published well-regarded white papers. They had testified before the legislature twice. Brennan Hale also had another client, a larger client. The vendor that built the trust index had retained Brennan Hale's strategy arm for 18 months. The 2 engagements were run by separate teams in separate offices in separate cities. There was a written wall between them. The wall was called in the contract an information barrier. The board was told about the relationship in a single sentence on page 4 of the disclosure form. No one asked a follow-up question. The review came back in 9 weeks. It was 46 pages. It recommended approval with what it called standard monitoring provisions. The The standard monitoring provisions were a quarterly report from the vendor to the board, summarizing system performance in the vendor's own words. The board met to vote on a Thursday morning. 5 members were present. 1 was absent. 1 had recused herself because her brother-in-law worked at the vendor. The vote was 4-1 in favor. The dissent came from a member named Ruth Halberg, a former public defender who had joined the board the previous fall. Her written dissent ran 2 pages. It was attached as an appendix to the meeting minutes. The minutes were posted online in a PDF that did not load properly on most phones. After approval, the board kept receiving the quarterly reports. The reports were always on time. They were always under 20 pages. They always concluded that the system was operating within expected parameters. No one on the board's analyst staff had the time or the access to verify the underlying data. They were not given the data. They were given the summary. The board never opened an investigation. The board never issued a corrective order. The board never used the one real power it had, which was to suspend deployment pending review. When reporters later asked the board's director what had gone wrong, he said the board had followed its own procedures at every step. He was telling the truth. That was the problem. The procedures had worked exactly as written. The procedures were the failure. Nadia, of course, did not know any of this. She had never heard of the PAIB. Most people in her city hadn't. The guardrail had been there the whole time. It just wasn't holding anything up. Sunday morning came in slow and gray. The kind of light that filled the kitchen window without ever quite becoming bright. Nadia woke before her alarm, which was nothing unusual. She had not used the alarm on a Sunday in years. She lay in bed for a long time, watching the ceiling fan turn. The fan had a small wobble. She had been meaning to call someone about it for 2 summers now. She decided again that she would call this week. Then she swung her feet over the side of the bed and found her slippers in the dark. The kettle was the first sound. A low, climbing whistle that filled the apartment before she caught it. She spooned coffee into the small paper cone and poured the water in a slow circle, the way her mother had shown her. The smell rose up and settled into the corners of the room. She breathed it in. She did not check her phone. Her daughter Myra was still asleep in the next room. Nadia could hear the soft, uneven breath through the cracked door. 8 years old. A loose tooth she kept worrying with her tongue. A drawing of a horse taped to the fridge that did not, in any honest sense, look like a horse. Nadia loved it anyway. She loved it more than she would have loved a good one. She drank the first cup standing up at the counter. The tile was cold under her feet. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked twice and then gave up. A car door closed somewhere down the block. The radiator clicked the way old radiators do, settling into the morning. The grocery list was on a yellow pad by the toaster. She had written it the night before in pencil with the small, neat letters she used for everything. Bread, eggs, the cheese Myra liked, the one in the blue wrapper, apples, a chicken for Wednesday, soap, the kind without perfume, because Myra's skin had been red around the elbows again. She read the list twice. She added pasta. She crossed out apples, then wrote them back in. Myra came out at 9:15 in mismatched socks. She climbed onto the chair across from Nadia and put her chin on the table and did not say anything for a full minute. This was how Myra woke up. Slowly and with great seriousness. Nadia poured her a glass of milk and slid it across without comment. "Are we going to the store?" Myra said eventually. Not a question, the way she said it. A small confirmation of the world. After breakfast. "Can I get the cereal with the bird?" "We'll see." They ate toast with butter. Myra talked about a girl at school named Priya who could whistle through her teeth. Nadia listened and made the right faces at the right times. The sun finally came through the window and laid a warm rectangle across the floor. The cat, who belonged to the downstairs neighbor but visited often, came in through the cracked balcony door and sat in the rectangle and closed its eyes. They walked to the market on the corner. It was 4 blocks. Myra held her hand for the first 2 and then ran ahead for the last 2, stopping at every crack to look back. The air smelled like wet leaves and bread from the bakery on the avenue. A man Nadia recognized, but did not know nodded at her from the bus stop. She nodded back. the market, she scanned each item at the self-checkout. The little beeps came one after another, small and certain. The screen showed her trust index in the corner, a pale green number she had stopped noticing months ago, the way you stop noticing the weather icon on a phone. 847. She tapped her card. The card worked. The receipt printed. Myra got the cereal with the bird. They walked home with 2 bags between them. Myra insisted on carrying one, and the handle dug red lines into her small palm, and she would not give it up. Nadia let her win. In the afternoon, she watered the spider plant on the windowsill. It was the only plant she had managed to keep alive. She had inherited it from a coworker who moved away in 2019, and it had outlasted 3 jobs and 1 apartment. She gave it exactly half a cup, the way it liked. She made soup for dinner. She read Myra 2 chapters of a book about a girl and a fox. She turned the light off at 9:45 and listened to her daughters breathing slow and even out in the dark. The radiator clicked. The fan wobbled. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and onion. She slept well that night. It was the last time she would. Nadia stands in the hallway of her apartment building, key card in her hand. The little reader by the door blinks red. It blinked red in the opening of this story, and it is blinking red now. She has tried it 3 times. The 4th time, she just stops and looks at it. The hallway smells like the lemon cleaner the building manager uses on Mondays. Somewhere down the corridor, a television is playing the morning news. Her daughter Myra is still inside the apartment, eating cereal at the table by the window. Nadia can picture her there, swinging her feet, not yet knowing that the door her mother just walked through will not let her mother back in. She tries the card a 5th time. Red. She pulls out her phone. The banking app opens, then closes. Opens, then closes. On the 3rd try, a message appears in calm gray letters. Access temporarily restricted. Please contact your trust index representative. There is a number. The number, when she calls it, plays 4 notes of hold music and then disconnects. Her transit card, when she taps it against the gate at the corner, also blinks red. This is what a score going red looks like from the ground. It does not announce itself. is no siren, no letter, no person to argue with. There is only a series of small machines that used to say yes and now say no. The door, the bank, the bus, the pharmacy down the block, where her mother's blood pressure medication is waiting, will say no in about 20 minutes when she finally walks there because she cannot ride. What happened, in the plainest words, is this. The trust index ran an overnight update. The update folded in new data sources the company had quietly licensed 6 weeks earlier. Utility payment timing, streaming habits, the social graphs of people you message most. The model reweighted everyone. For most users, the score moved a point or two. For roughly 400,000 people, the score dropped past the threshold the system calls Tier 4. Red, Tier 4 is not a punishment. The company has said this in writing many times. Tier 4 is a precaution. In practice, Tier 4 means the building door, the bank app, the transit card, and the pharmacy register all receive the same instruction at the same time. Hold, verify, refer. The 400,000 are not random. The auditor from Section 11, the one who would not sign, predicted this exact pattern in a document filed and ignored. The people who fell were disproportionately women who had recently changed addresses. People whose phone contacts included others already flagged. People who worked night shifts and paid bills in the early morning hours, which the new model read as instability. Nadia is all three. By 8 in the morning, a hospital in the next district turns away a delivery driver whose employer credentials route through the same trust layer. By 9, a school in the south of the city quietly reassigns 12 children to a different classroom because their parents' scores have shifted, and the enrollment system has flagged the family file for review. The children do not know this. Their parents will find out at pickup. By 10, a man named Idris, a welder Nadia has never met, learns that the loan he signed for last week has been rescinded. The bank uses the phrase pending reevaluation. He sits in his car in the parking lot for a long time before he drives home to tell his wife. By noon, the call center the company runs has received 81,000 calls. The hold time is 4 hours. Most callers hang up before a human answers. The ones who reach a human are told the same sentence. Your case has been logged. Please allow 72 hours for review. 72 hours is a long time when your front door does not open. Nadia is still standing in the hallway. She has tried the card a 6th time. She is thinking about Myra inside, and the medication at the pharmacy, and the shift she is supposed to work at 3. She is thinking about the auditor, whose name she does not know, and the memo she has never read, and the press release she half remembers from 6 months ago. The one that promised the system would be fairer than any human. A neighbor steps off the elevator. He nods at her kindly, the way neighbors do. He taps his card. The reader blinks green. His door opens. He goes inside. Nadia watches the door close behind him. The hallway is quiet again. The reader by her own door, the one she has lived behind for 9 years, blinks patiently red, red, red. The morning after the score turned red, Nadia woke up at 5:47. She had not really slept. Her phone sat face down on the nightstand, the way you put down a thing you are afraid of. She picked it up. The notifications had not stopped overnight. They had only piled up. Her debit card was still frozen. Her transit pass still inactive. The apartment building's keypad still asked her for a backup code she did not have. She had spent the night in the lobby chair, waiting for a neighbor to come home and let her in. The neighbor had looked at her differently. Word travels fast in a building with shared scoring. At 8, she made coffee with the last filter and turned on the local news. The trust office was holding a press conference. A woman in a navy blazer stood at a podium with the city seal behind her. She said the words, "Isolated calibration event." She said fewer than 4,000 accounts affected. She said the system was working as designed, and that affected residents could file a Form 7B for expedited review. She did not say sorry. The news anchor moved on to weather. Nadia called the number on the screen. She was caller 218. The hold music was a piano version of a song she used to like. She put the phone on speaker and started a list on the back of an envelope. Bank, landlord, job, doctor, mom. The bank told her they could not unfreeze the card without without a clearance code from the trust office. The trust office told her the clearance code would issue once her Form 7B was reviewed, which would take 7 to 10 business days. She asked how she was supposed to buy food. The agent paused. She said there were community resources. She read out an address. The community resource was a church basement on 42nd. There was a folding table with granola bars and a man with a clipboard. He asked for her ID. He did not ask for her score. That small kindness almost broke her. By noon, her story was on a local news segment. A reporter named Devon stood outside her building and said the words, "algorithmic glitch." A class action firm had already filed by lunchtime. Nadia got a text from a number she did not know, offering to represent her for no fee up front. She got 4 more by 3 p.m. She did not answer any of them. Her mother called from the hospital across town. The hospital had flagged her mother's visitor list. Nadia was on it. Nadia's score was now attached to her mother's care plan as a household risk factor. A social worker had come by to ask questions. Her mother had cried. Nadia drove there in a borrowed car and sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes before she could go inside. The Regulator announced an inquiry at 4 p.m. A man in a gray suit said the agency would review the incident with all appropriate seriousness. He used the phrase "lessons learned." A reporter asked when the review would conclude. He said these things take time. The company's stock dropped 6% at the open. By close, it had recovered 4. Analysts on a business channel called it a buying opportunity. One of them said, "The market has already priced in the reputational risk." He smiled when he said it. Nadia spent the second day on the phone. 11 hold lines. 3 transfers that ended in dial tones. Her employer's HR department called to say her position was under review pending clearance. Not fired, just under review. She was told to use her personal days. She walked to a payday lender on the corner because her cash was gone. The lender ran her score before he ran her ID. He shook his head without looking up. She walked out. A man on the sidewalk was filming the storefront on his phone and narrating quietly. She realized he was filming her too. She pulled her hood up. The attorney she finally agreed to meet had an office above a dry cleaner. He had a stack of folders on his desk, each one a person like her. He said the case would take years. He said most plaintiffs settled for amounts that did not cover their losses. He said the company would not admit fault. He said this calmly, the way a doctor tells you a diagnosis they have given before. That night, Nadia sat on the floor of her apartment with the envelope in her hand. The list had grown. Nothing on it was crossed off. Outside her window, the city kept moving. The story was already fading from the evening news. Let's step outside Nadia's kitchen for a moment. Let's leave her there at the table with the cold mug and the locked phone and the slow morning light. She isn't real, but the door that closed on her is. In 2014, the Chinese State Council published a planning document. It was titled, in English translation, Planning Outline for the Construction of a Social Credit System. It set a target date of 2020. The goal was to build a nationwide framework that would, in the words of the document, allow the trustworthy to roam everywhere under heaven, while making it hard for the discredited to take a single step. The system was never one system. That is the first thing to understand. It was a patchwork. Local pilots in dozens of cities, commercial scoring tools built by private companies, court blacklists for people who refused to pay debts. By 2019, the Chinese Supreme People's Court reported that more than 13 million people had been placed on a list that blocked them from buying plane tickets. Around 5 million were blocked from high-speed rail. These numbers are public. They came from the court itself. The city of Rongcheng in Shandong province became one of the most studied examples. Each adult resident started with 1,000 points. Points went up for donating blood, for volunteering, for praise from the local government. Points went down for traffic violations, for spreading what officials called rumors online, for failing to visit aging parents. Your score determined what loans you could get, what jobs you could apply for, whether your child could enroll in certain schools. Sesame Credit, run by Ant Financial, an affiliate of Alibaba, launched in 2015. It was technically a private commercial product. It scored users between 350 and 950. A high score got you faster hotel check-ins, deposit-free bike rentals, easier visa applications to Singapore and Luxembourg. The exact inputs were never fully disclosed. The company said behavior, relationships, and purchase history all factored in. The Uyghur population in Xinjiang faced something darker. Reporting by Human Rights Watch, the Associated Press, and the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists documented a system called the Integrated Joint Operations Platform. It pulled data from checkpoints, phones, facial recognition cameras, and household visits. It flagged people for behaviors as ordinary as praying, fasting, or using a back door. Leaked internal documents published in 2019 as the China Cables showed that the flags fed directly into decisions about who would be sent to what the government called vocational training centers. Estimates of the detained population reached above 1 million. These are the documented facts. They were reported by Reuters, by the New York Times, by the BBC, by academic researchers like Jessica Back at Chinafile and Darren Byler at the University of Colorado. Now here is the part the story is really about. Because the warning isn't only about one country. In 2020, the Italian city of Bologna announced a pilot called the Smart Citizen Wallet. Residents would earn points for recycling, for using public transport, for good civic behavior. Participation was voluntary. The points unlocked discounts at cultural venues. The mayor described it as a tool for encouraging sustainability. In the United States, credit scoring has existed for decades. FICO scores, tenant screening reports, gig worker ratings on Uber and DoorDash, risk scores used by insurers and hospitals. Each one is narrow. Each one is private. Together, they form something that is not called a social credit system, but functions in pieces like one. In 2019, the United States Department of Homeland Security began collecting social media handles from visa applicants. In 2023, the United Kingdom expanded its use of algorithmic risk scoring inside the department for work and pensions. An investigation by The Guardian, published in 2024, found that the system had flagged tens of thousands of benefit claimants for fraud review on the basis of patterns that were never publicly explained. The Australian government ran a program called Robodupt between 2016 and 2019. An automated system matched tax records against welfare payments and issued debt notices to about 470,000 people. A royal commission later found the program unlawful. At least 2 people who received notices took their own lives. The government eventually paid back 751 million Australian dollars. Nadia is fictional. The trust index in this story is fictional, but every mechanism you have heard tonight, the score, the silent threshold change, the locked card, the 11 hold lines, the memo filed and forgotten. Every one of them is drawn from something that has already happened in a real city to real people in the last 10 years. The doomsday isn't coming. Pieces of it are already. The fork was a Tuesday. Of course it was a Tuesday. It happened 18 months before Nadia's score went red. She did not know about it. Almost no one did. It was an amendment hearing in a committee room on the 4th floor of a government building she had walked past 100 times. The room had bad carpet and a water cooler that gurgled every few minutes. 6 members of the committee sat at a curved desk. 3 staffers sat behind them. A handful of reporters sat in the back, mostly scrolling their phones. The bill was called the Consumer Trust Transparency Act. It was 41 pages long. Most of it was procedural, but on page 19, in a single paragraph, was the thing that mattered. Section 14, subsection C, required that any algorithm used to score citizens for access to financial services, housing, or transportation had to be audited every 12 months by an independent body. The audit had to be public. The scoring company had to hand over its training data. And any citizen whose score dropped more than 15 points in a quarter had the right to a written explanation in plain language within 30 days. That paragraph had been written by a junior staffer named Eliza Pham. She was 28. She had a master's degree in public policy and a small apartment with a cat named Pickle. She had spent 4 months drafting Section 14. She had read the work of Cathy O'Neill and Frank Pasquale. She had interviewed software auditors in 3 countries. She believed, quietly, that this paragraph could save a lot of people a lot of pain. The committee voted on whether to keep Section 14 in the bill. The vote was scheduled for 10:30 in the morning. At 9:47, a lobbyist for a trade group called the Digital Services Alliance walked into the office of the committee chair. His name was Marcus. He wore a gray suit and carried a folder. The folder contained a 1-page summary of why Section 14 would, in his words, stifle innovation, increase compliance costs, and put American firms at a disadvantage against foreign competitors. He had delivered similar folders to 4 other committee members earlier that week. At 10:31, the chair called the vote. Section 14 was struck from the bill by a vote of 4-2. The whole thing took 90 seconds. One member abstained because she was checking a text message. Another voted yes to strike because his staff had told him that morning that the language was redundant with existing federal oversight. There was no existing federal oversight. The staffer had been told that by an industry briefing paper. Eliza Pham was not in the room. She was at her desk, 2 floors down, eating a yogurt. She found out at 11:15 when a colleague forwarded her the markup. She read the email twice. Then she closed her laptop and went for a walk around the block. The bill passed without Section 14. 3 weeks later, the press release praised it as a balanced approach to consumer protection in the digital age. The vote count made the back page of 2 newspapers. No one wrote about the paragraph that had been removed. There was no reason to. It had not become law. It had simply, quietly, not happened. If Section 14 had passed, the trust index that locked Nadia's account would have been audited 4 times before it ever touched her score. The audit would have caught the silent update. The plain language explanation rule would have meant that the first time her coffee shop card was declined, she would have received a letter explaining exactly why. She could have appealed. She could have fixed it. The 30-day clock would have given her time. None of that happened. Because of 90 seconds in a room with bad carpet on a Tuesday 18 months earlier. This is what the fork looks like. Not a war room, not a dramatic showdown. A junior staffer eating yogurt. A lobbyist with a folder. A committee member checking a text. A vote that took less time than it takes to boil an egg. Cathy O'Neill, the mathematician who wrote Weapons of Math Destruction, said it plainly in 2016. Models are opinions embedded in mathematics. She spent years warning that, without mandatory audits, these systems would drift, and the drift would hurt the people least able to fight back. She testified. She wrote op-eds. She gave talks in rooms much larger than the one where Section 14 died. Eliza Pham kept the original draft of Section 14 in a folder on her desktop. She named the folder What Could Have Been. She never opened it again, but she never deleted it either. The warnings were there. They had always been there. That is the part Nadia could not stop thinking about, sitting at her sister's kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold in her hands. People had said this would happen. People had written it down. People had stood in front of cameras and microphones and small academic panels, and they had said the words plainly. And the world had heard them and filed them and moved on. In 2016, a mathematician named Cathy O'Neill published a book called Weapons of Math Destruction. She had worked on Wall Street. She knew what algorithms could do when no one was watching. She wrote that scoring systems were becoming, in her words, opaque, unregulated, and uncontestable. She warned that the people hurt by these systems would be the people least able to push back. The book was reviewed. It was praised. It sat on the shelves of the same offices that 8 years later would build the trust index. 6 years before Nadia's card was declined at the coffee shop, a researcher named Shoshana Zuboff sat for an interview about her book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. She spoke slowly. She chose her words carefully. She said that the new economy was built on, in her phrase, the unilateral claiming of private human experience as free raw material. She warned that scoring and sorting would not stop at advertising. She said it would move into housing, into hiring, into the simple ability to buy bread. She was invited onto podcasts. She was quoted in long magazine magazine pieces. Then the news cycle moved. In 2018, a group of engineers inside a large American tech company signed a letter. They asked their employer to stop building tools that could be used for mass scoring. Some of them resigned. One of them, in an exit interview that later leaked, said, "We can see where this ends. We have seen the prototypes. We are telling you now, while it is still possible to stop." The company issued a statement praising open dialogue. The project continued under a different name. In 2020, Timnit Gebru, then a researcher at Google, co-authored a paper about the dangers of large language models and the systems built on top of them. She was pushed out of the company shortly after. In an interview afterward, she said, "There is a lot of money in not asking these questions." She kept asking them anyway. She founded an independent institute. She testified before legislators. The legislators thanked her for her time. The warnings did not only come from researchers. In 2021, a city council member in a mid-sized American city stood up during a budget meeting. She was a former social worker. She had read the contract for the new municipal scoring pilot. She said, into a microphone that picked up the hum of the room, "We are about to let a private company decide who in this city is worth serving. I would like the record to show that I objected." The motion passed 11-1. Her objection is in the minutes. The minutes are public. Almost no one read them. In 2022, a former employee of a credit analytics firm gave a deposition in a lawsuit that was later sealed. She described internal meetings where executives discussed expanding the score into rental decisions, insurance decisions, employment screening. She said she had asked, in one of those meetings, what would happen to people whose scores were wrong. She testified that her supervisor answered, "That's a customer service problem, not an engineering problem." She left the company. The expansion went ahead. In 2023, Joy Buolamwini, the founder of the Algorithmic Justice League, spoke at a conference about what she called the coded gaze. She said, "Whoever codes the system embeds her views. Whoever owns the system shapes our lives." She had been saying versions of this sentence for almost a decade. She would say it again. She would have to were the smaller voices, the ones whose names did not appear in books. The grandmother in Rotterdam, who lost her housing benefit to a fraud detection algorithm and spent 3 years trying to get it back. The father in Michigan, flagged by an unemployment system that accused tens of thousands of people wrongly of fraud. The students in the United Kingdom, whose exam grades were assigned by a formula in the summer of 2020, who stood in the street and chanted at the buildings of the people who built it. Each warning had a date. Each date had a record. Each record sat in a file. And the file, somewhere in a server room, hummed quietly while the system kept running, and the score on Nadia's screen kept climbing toward red. Picture for a moment a country that said no. Not no to computers, not no to data, not no to the trust office, even because the trust office still got built, still hired its analysts, still rented the same gray floor in the same gray building. Picture instead a smaller no, a quieter no, a no that fit on a single page of legislation in the spring before the trust index went live. The no said this: a score may describe a person, but it may not by itself close a door. That was the whole rule. One sentence. A score could exist. A score could be calculated. A score could even be shown to a landlord or a bank or a bus company. But the score could not be the thing that decided. A human being had to decide. A human being had to put their name on the decision, and that human being had to be able to explain in plain words, on a piece of paper a person could hold, why the answer was no. In that country, Nadia still wakes up at 6:14 on a Tuesday. The light is still gray. The kettle still clicks. Her phone still buzzes with a number because the trust index still ships. Because the same company still wins the same contract. Because the same pressures still push the same buttons. But when the coffee shop reader hesitates over her card, the barista shrugs and runs it again. Because the law says a machine cannot refuse her on its own. When her landlord opens the tenant portal, he sees her score, yes, but next to it sits a box he has to fill in himself, in his own handwriting, signed and dated, before the system will let him move on. He fills it in. He renews her lease. It takes him an extra 40 seconds. He grumbles about it over dinner and forgets it by morning. The auditor who wouldn't sign in this other country still wouldn't sign. The memo from 2 years earlier still gets written. The same engineers still notice the same drift in the same model. The difference is that when they raise their hands, there is somewhere for the hand to be seen. A regulator with teeth. A small office, underfunded, understaffed, run by tired people in cheap shoes, but real. They open a file. They request the training data. They publish a quarterly report nobody reads, except the 4 journalists who cover this beat. And one of those journalists writes a story, and the story sits at the bottom of a homepage for a day. And somewhere a senator's aide clips it and slides it into a folder. And 6 months later, there is a hearing. And at the hearing, a woman who looks a little like Nadia testifies about a coffee shop. And the cameras are mostly off. And the room is mostly empty. And still, the rule holds. The score may describe. The score may not decide. It is not a beautiful country. It is not a country without surveillance, without scoring, without the slow creep of every transaction becoming a data point in someone else's spreadsheet. The trust office still exists. The cameras still watch. The discounts still go to the well-behaved, and the well-behaved still notice who is missing from the line at the cheaper register. But the door does not lock on its own. The bank does not freeze on its own. The bus does not refuse on its own. There is always, between Nadia and the closed door, a person she can look at, a name she can learn, a sentence she can read. And because there is, the engineers build differently. The thresholds are softer. The appeals are real. The model gets audited badly, slowly, imperfectly, but audited. The drift gets caught earlier. The harm when it comes, and it does come, because harm always comes, is smaller, slower, more visible, easier to undo. That country was reachable. That country is reachable. It was not a utopia, and it is not a utopia. It needed no new technology, no breakthrough, no genius. It needed one sentence in one law, passed in one spring, by people who were tired and distracted and worried about other things, and who, in the world we actually live in, voted the other way, or did not vote at all, or were not asked. The grief is not that we could not have done it, grief is that we could have. The grief is that we still could. The grief is that Nadia, in her real kitchen, on her real Tuesday, is waking up in the country that didn't. So that's where we leave Nadia, sitting at her kitchen table on a Wednesday afternoon, 2 months after the morning her score turned red. Her bank account works again. Her transit card works again. The coffee shop on the corner still won't quite meet her eyes, but she goes anyway because she likes the coffee and because she has decided not to be the kind of person who stops going places. She keeps a paper notebook now, phone numbers, account numbers, the names of her cousins, a little map of her own neighborhood in case the app ever goes dark again. She told her sister she felt silly, writing things down like a grandmother. Her sister said, "Write more." That's the whole story. A woman, a number, a city that decided the number was the woman. You probably noticed, while you were listening, that no one in this story was a villain. The engineers who built the trust index were proud of their work. The auditor who refused to sign was trying to help. The press officer who read the statement believed most of it. The regulator was understaffed. The memo got filed. The vote got lost in a Tuesday afternoon. No one woke up one morning and decided to build a cage. They built a tool, and then another tool, and then a rule, and then a default. And one day the cage was just there, and people were already living inside it. That is how these things actually happen. Not with a speech, not with a uniform, with a software update on a Thursday. I want you to know that the pieces of this story are real. Rongcheng is a real city. Suzhou has a real points app. Sesame Credit was a real private score in China, and Shima was its real name. The Dutch tax authority really did use an algorithm that ruined the lives of tens of thousands of families, many of them immigrants. And the Prime Minister really did resign over it in 2021. Australia's Robodupt really did chase hundreds of thousands of people for money they didn't owe, and people really did die. Cathy O'Neill really did write weapons of math destruction. Timnit Gebru really was fired from Google after raising concerns. The warnings in this episode are not warnings about the future. They are warnings about last Tuesday. Nadia is not real. Her kitchen is not real. The coffee shop on her corner is not real. I made her up so you would have someone to walk beside while you heard the rest. That is what stories are for. You know this now. You heard it while you were falling asleep, which is a strange and good way to hear something, because the part of you that's drifting doesn't argue. It just takes the shape of the story in. Tomorrow, you might not remember Nadia's name. You might not remember the Auditor, or the Memo, or the 11 hold lines. That's all right. What I hope stays with you is smaller than that. A little tug the next time someone tells you a score is just a score. A little pause the next time a screen says no and won't say why. A little patience with the people in your life whose lives have been quietly shaped by systems they can't see. You don't have to do anything with this. You don't have to fight anything tonight. You worked today. You're tired. You earned this rest. The world goes on tomorrow the way it always does. Some of it will be beautiful. Some of it will be unfair. You'll move through it the way you always have, with whatever kindness and stubbornness you brought into this evening. That's enough. That has always been enough. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw unclench. The room is dark and the door is locked, and the people you love are breathing somewhere nearby or somewhere far, and either way, they are still here, and so are you. Nadia is fine tonight. She wrote her sister's number in her notebook. She left a light on in the hallway. She is sleeping the way you are about to sleep, in a world that is more complicated than it should be, and more survivable than it looks. Thank you for spending these hours with me. It means something to be trusted with someone's sleep. Subscribe for a new AI story every night. One tap, and something fascinating is waiting for you tomorrow. Sweet dreams. A story to fall asleep to and wake up from. Sweet dreams.